right, it is 2:15 exactly. So I want to start off by welcoming everyone. I think this is our first breakout session, so I'm very excited to see everybody here. Will we be able to access recorded sessions? I believe that you will. They are going to be available, I think, after the conference is over. Okay. So in case you weren't sure where you are, this is a session called Resilience Care, What Self-Care Really Is, and How Relational Care Can Help. So hopefully you are where you think you are and where you want to be. And I'm so glad that you could be with us today. And we are jumping into virtual world with both feet here. So fingers crossed that everything goes the way we want it to. If you come in, since I made the announcement, if you would please put your name in the chat. That is a way that they're going to be kind of doing some record keeping of attendance and who was able to attend the different sessions. If you have any questions, as Mary is going through her presentation, she has welcomed those questions along the way. So if you think of something that you would like to ask during the session, you can wave at us, you can do the virtual hand wave, you can put it in the chat, you could unmute yourself and just go ahead and ask that question when Mary takes a breath. So she definitely would like to have, interaction on the way if you have some questions. So I guess without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Mary McKinney and let her go ahead and kind of tell you a little bit about her background, and then she's going to get started with the presentation.
Thank you, Kristen. Hey, everybody. I'm afraid I can't see most of your faces, so I am kind of seeing the names as they pop up, and I appreciate knowing a little of who's here. But this is the virtual world that we're in now, so I'm glad to see everybody, and I'm so excited to be a part again of the WCCI conference. So glad that we found a way to do it this year and not have to miss it again. And I really love the theme that we have this year of community is the solution. I always love our themes, but this one certainly fits right into what I do for a living and how I think about things. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, as you can see there on the screen, and I'm in private practice here in Boone, been here in private practice in Boone since 2001. And the idea of really looking at our relationships and how they can impede our health and well-being, as well as how they really boost our well-being and our resilience, is something that I talk about a lot. I try to learn about a lot, and is certainly very important. So as we consider this topic of resilience in the whole conference, and specifically today in this time we'll spend together, and the role of relational care in it specifically, then hopefully we'll be able to help one another with that. I don't know if I really need to share anything else about myself. That I think I'm just saying about my private practice is probably good enough for now. I am very passionate about the ideas of shattering stigma and building resilience. That's something that I really, my whole career and very much about my personal life is focused on, and I'm very grateful for opportunities to be able to build that for myself and any ways that I can be a part of that in my community like we're doing today. Stigma definitely gets in the way of our health in so many ways, including really blocking our ability to access good resilience care. So that's part of telling our stories and listening to one another's stories, as well as directly having these overt conversations about how do we build these things together. So as we start, I want to briefly talk about three terms that are words that we use a lot, and I just want to be clear of the way that I'm using these terms as I speak today. The first is, of course, resilience. That I find it to be very important to clearly think about it as a process. It's the process by which we can adapt well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. So we sure don't have lives that are free of those things, and sometimes that increases. And so the ability to have resilience in the face of whatever comes our way is, of course, so critical. one of the ways that we do that, one of the ways that we boost our own resilience is through self-care. And I know there's been certainly locally a movement towards saying the phrase wellness practices instead of self-care. And I'm perfectly on board with that. For some people talking about self-care, it's kind of like one more thing I'm supposed to do, and then I don't do it well enough or that kind of thing. So really focusing on what am I doing to be well? And again, whichever phrase you prefer suits me just fine. And focusing that on the practice of really taking action, that active role to preserve or to improve our own health, our well-being and happiness, including during those periods of higher stress or distress, that we can do things on a regular basis and on a reactive basis in order to practice that wellness. I always find it very important to talk about both of those pieces of regular care, regular self-care, and I'll speak a bit, of course, about relational care, which is my focus mainly today. But regular care and reactive care. Regular, of course, is what do I do every day to take care of myself, every week, regularly, having a regular time, place that I make sure to do those things, have some kind of movement every day, hopefully, good nutrition, sleep, as well as some mindfulness practices, ways that I really focus to ground myself and be calm, be settled for the day in regular ways, and including big chunks of time, like a whole day or half a day, as well as I really like to talk to people about making sure you've got things that you can do even just in 30 seconds, just a quick burst of something to take care of yourself, as well as making sure to have with some regularity those longer times. So making sure that that is very much ingrained in your routine to the best of your ability, the best of my ability, is very important. And to not rely, I find that it seems like often we want to rely on one or the other. It's either easier for me to make sure I have things that I do every day, or I've got really great things I can do when crisis hits. And it seems like, I don't know about any research about this, but just my anecdotal studies across the time of my practicing for about 30 years, it seems like we really have to work hard on the other one, most of us. So work hard on the other one. Know which one is your area that for the improvement and work on it. And of course, relational care, the definition that I really like is this one. Again, that word practice, the active role, the practice of presence and connection. And again, those two words, presence and connection, as action to preserve or improve another person's or my own health, well-being, and happiness, again, including during those periods of stress. So including because it's important to be doing that every day. I need to have social interaction, social support, social engagement for the care of my central nervous system. It's not a luxury, it's something that I need. Even a person who is very introverted, like my husband, needs to have that social engagement in order to be well. He needs less of it than I do, a lot less of it than I do, but he needs it. We all do. So that regular, how do I regularly have that and get from other people and giving it to other people? It needs to be going in both directions, not all the time. Not every time we're doing it all at the same time. Sometimes we do one or the other more, of course, but we need a steady dose of it, as well as that reactive time. Things are hard right now. I've got a crisis going on. Who are my people? Who's going to give me a hug? Who's going to give me a go girl or whatever that might be useful, or just sit with me? And again, with that presence, where can I have that and also be that for other people when it's, quote, needed? It's needed every day. It's also needed in those crises times. I am going to just very briefly acknowledge the nervous system, the central nervous system, and the role of it in this conversation. That I suspect there are people on here who probably could speak about this far better than me and at great length. I know we've got one nursing person. If you don't know a ton about this, I'll be happy to share some resources with you in terms of what it has to do specifically with relational care and mental health in general. feel free to send me an email or a text and ask me for that. For the purposes of right now, I just want to mention, as we're thinking about this topic today, to be thinking about these parts of our nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, which is where our responses for fight, flight, or freeze come, that allow us to be able to really attend to immediate danger by giving us those doses of adrenaline and cortisol. That's our stress response system, as well as the parasympathetic nervous system. And a lot of you probably have heard these phrases of referencing that as either the rest and digest system or the breed and feed system. That's the part of our central nervous system that allows our bodies to relax so that we have the opportunity to repair any physical, whether it's about fatigue or maybe injury that came during the day from doing some fighting, that we have that opportunity to repair and to rebuild strength and have more of that physical resilience, as well as the mental health repair and rebuild that we need. As a brief, making sure we're having it in the recognition of this is a both and situation, both self-care and relational care. I'll speak just a little bit more about that in a minute. I want to highlight this slide as some of the self-care practices that very specifically help our nervous system to settle down. Lots and lots and lots of self-care practices do that. These are ones that really have been shown to intentionally stimulate the ventral vagus nerve to help settle that stress response system. So they're among the ones that I really like to try to practice myself, as well as to recommend to my clients. That's certainly controlled breathing. There are so many ways to do controlled breathing. And I say to clients who come in as we speak about this, if you're doing it right. There's really, best I can tell, there's not a wrong way to do controlled breathing, relaxation breathing, whatever phrasing you like. And they're a little different, but however you're thinking about it, if it's something that causes you to pay attention to your breath and to control it a little bit, fantastic. And this idea of doing an especially prolonged exhale seems to really have more of an impact on that, the central nervous system, the ventral vagus nerve, to be able to help settle that. So I usually talk to people about doing a count, maybe 4 in, hold it for 2 counts, and then out of 8. That, best I can tell, there's not such a big difference between it being 5 and 10 or whatever, but something that is more of a prolonged exhale that I surely recommend. And that's from the science about this, the research about it. A cool one that is actually kind of new in my knowledge, in my practice, is this diving reflex. I've known about people having benefit from doing things like holding something cold or putting something cold to their neck or whatever for many years, but really understanding that it's connected to this process of stimulating the ventral vagus nerve in order to signal calming that stress response system. This diving reflex of having that pretty intense cold, obviously within safe measures, on your face or your neck, and briefly holding your breath, that jump starts this process with our nervous system to help that settling. And that's so cool. I love things when they can be simple and easy. For me, it's easier to remember and much more likely I'm going to do it. Probably a lot of you also know about the butterfly hug. There's multiple ways to do that. You can just simply have your hands like this and tap here. That has a calming effect in the way that we're talking about right now, or more of a literal hug for yourself. That's great, especially if you're alone, like there's nobody else in the room here with me, or if for whatever reason, right, you don't want a hug from somebody that's nearby. You can do this for yourself, or it can be a both. You can get both a hug from somebody and do this for yourself. And another one that I have really come to put a lot more stock in is simply humming. There's so much research about the wonderful benefits of singing and chanting, especially if we do it together, on our mental health and our physical health. just simply humming really does seem to stimulate that ventral vagus nerve, according to what I understand about the science. And so just whatever, even if you can't really carry a tune, it doesn't really matter so much. Just that simple act of humming a little bit to give yourself some more wellness when you need it, quote, because a rough time's happening, or just because it's good care. Thinking about self-care or wellness practices, I personally find it very helpful to have quotes or these visuals like this, different things that help me to make sure I remember why I'm doing what I'm doing and to remind me to do it. And I'm struggling a little bit right now because I've covered up my words. There we go. From Brian Andreas, that probably a lot of you know, the stick people, I can't remember exactly what that's called. Somebody probably knows what I'm talking about, but there are days I drop words of comfort on myself like falling leaves, and remember that it is enough to be taken care of by myself. I find that to be one of the kinds of examples that, for me at least, helps me to remember to do it, why I'm doing it, and now's a good time. Go ahead and do it. So find things like that for yourself. You probably already have plenty of them, and make them easily accessible for your mind. And my computer and my cell phone are both just filled with pictures and quotes that I will occasionally just pull up to focus myself on this work, this practice of taking care of myself. This phrase of both and might be the most frequent phrase I say in all of my career and life in general, that I didn't grow up understanding both and. I grew up with a lot of either or thinking and examples and teaching, I don't think intentionally by people, but nonetheless, it really was my reality that I learned to think about things in very much either or ways. And there are a few things in life for which that's true, but I'm coming more and more and more to realize that they are very much the exceptions, that almost everything that I take a look at, there's some kind of both and that's true of this conversation about self-care, self-regulating, as well as relational care and co-regulating. And I'm going to talk a bit more about specifically what I mean by co-regulating. And I'm sure a lot of you know about co-regulating, but I am going to highlight it, that we can't only rely on one. If we have a deficit of one of these areas, if I don't have enough self-care, enough self-regulation that I'm doing in an ongoing way, and in a way that I can access when more difficulty is happening, then I'm going to suffer, I'm going to struggle. And likewise, if I don't have enough co-regulating, enough relational care that I engage, then I'm definitely also going to struggle. There's, best I can tell, there's just no way out of that. There's no way to do either one of them well enough to make up for not doing the other one at least enough. So both and. Such an important part of this and most other conversations, in my opinion. I came across this phrase, and I'm afraid I've lost the attribution for it, but social connectedness is a biological imperative for safety and wellness, just like eating, just like sleeping, just like pick anything else. That if we don't have that kind of care, the relational care, the co-regulating, then we're not going to be healthy, including our body, including our general physical health. And you probably know it's quite an arbitrary distinction to make anyway between mental health and physical health and spiritual health and emotional health and relational health. Like, it's health. All of it is a part of a whole. We talk about them separately just to bring our focus to where we might add some things or celebrate some things that are going well for us. But again, one of them will not make up for deficits in any of the rest of them. And we're one body. We're not, over there's my spiritual health, over there's my relational health. We don't walk into different rooms with it. We literally carry it around with us to whatever room and whatever outside world space we're in. So really making sure to recognize that, just like self-care, but again, I'm focusing today on relational care, it's a biological imperative for safety as well as for wellness. The safety piece, to just briefly comment about what happens for us with social connectedness and safety, I bet you can think about anytime you've had something really scary happen, or you've witnessed somebody else have something really scary happen, especially if you think about children and you watch them take a fall or something, the very first thing that happens is look to mama or somebody to see, did you see that? Like, what do we need to do here? That connection piece that helps us to kind of gauge how big of a danger is this, as well as, are you here to help me? That kind of checking to see where the resources are. That's a instinctual sort of thing that almost always happens regardless of the age. And it's, how do I connect for that safety? And of course, it's also a bit of a scanning for, while I have just fallen, are you going to come eat me? You know, the tiger is going to come eat me or whatever. So it has these wired into us functions. We don't think, now today, if I get in a wreck, I need to make sure to look to somebody to see if they're going to help me. We're going to look. That's almost a guarantee, because it's wired into us biologically. It is an instinct that's pretty hard to override. And it has these wonderful two purposes, that it really helps us with our safety as well as for our wellness. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how it does that, or how to intentionally do it. I'm going to point you towards the work of Stephen Porges if you aren't already familiar with his polyvagal theory. I'm not going to try to do that justice at all right now. It's a wonderful body of work, and of course other folks that have done more research about this and looked at more intervention towards this, but I just want to highlight it for you to look at if it's not something you're already versed in. But to highlight this part about how the vagus nerve really helps to prompt that parasympathetic nervous system for us, where the calming aspect of the social engagement, the mechanics of that when, like the example I was just using of a child that falls, if a child falls and looks and mama's paying attention and mama's not jumping up to come take care, some big giant action, often the child will settle pretty quickly, because the mechanics of that social engagement has allowed the child's nervous system to settle down. It's not only a thought, like if mama ain't worried, I'm not worried. The child might have that thought, especially as they get older, but it's also literally that our central nervous system gets that information, goes, okay, and settles. You can see a number of things here about what relational care involves. I'm going to highlight the one in purple for some of our conversation today. And really thinking about how the ways in which we show empathy and curiosity, those two words, those are also words I speak of very often in doing mental health work and relational care work, empathy and curiosity. And they're not always easy for us. Even the most empathetic or the most curious of us, we have our moments. And sometimes some situations or some people, it might be a little harder to do, including sometimes with myself. Like sometimes I have a lot of trouble having empathy for myself and curiosity for myself. Like I think I know I should be doing something, and so I don't maybe take time to be curious about why am I not doing it, or what do I need in order to do it. So empathy and curiosity are two critical ways by which we allow ourselves to be more emotionally present, and thereby be able to be moved by and interested in others. And I will add, I should change my slide here, also ourselves, our own internal system, that we're able to be moved by our internal system and interested in our internal system, as well as these external systems of our relationships. Focusing on that idea of presence, we in my career, certainly I've learned techniques and tools and theory, and those are important things. And the research has shown over and over and over again that the overwhelming majority of what can be named as the reason why positive change happens in therapy is about the relationship between the therapist and the client. Over and over and over, that's been shown. So if the relationship is handled well, therapy, regardless of the kind of technique, is likely to have benefit. That's also true in our daily relationships, our family relationships, our relationships with coworkers, our friends, the cashier at the grocery store, whatever it is, that when we pay attention to our presence and know that that's good, regardless of the content of what's happening, presence, that matters. And probably everybody on here, just like me, has had more than one time in your life where there wasn't really anything for anybody to do. There's nothing to do to make it better, whatever it is. It's not better right now. It's awful right now. It's going to be awful tomorrow. There sometimes are times that we have in our life like that, yet presence matters, and it really can just help us to weather what we need to weather, and maybe even sometimes come out better. That presence, and I'll say presence again, focusing on let me be present with myself, mindfulness practices and such, as well as really being present with other people and allowing them to be present with us. That can, kind of like I was saying before about, we often have, it seems, I can either do better with daily self-care or I can do better with crisis self-care, but I'm probably struggle with one or the other. That seems to often be true for many of us also, of I'm really great at being there for you, but I stink at being there for me, or the other way around. That seems to be kind of universal from my non-scientific data collection that I've been doing across my lifetime in my career. But both are critical. If we can't do one of them well enough to really make up for the other, having that presence for ourselves as well as presence with other people and allowing them to be there for us. So the most precious gift we can offer others is our presence. And again, the most precious gift we can offer ourselves is our own presence, mindfulness, as well as accepting the presence of other people. To talk just a little bit about, sorry about that, co-regulation. Alan Fogel has introduced us to this definition of co-regulation, and obviously you can see it there. I'm really thinking about how, as we interact with one another, we either tend to help one another escalate more or calm more, based on what we're seeing in the reactions of the other person and how that feels to us. What we think about it, but more importantly, how it feels to us, literally in our body and our nervous system. How does it feel to be in the presence of whatever we're in the presence of? And we affect one another in that recursive way constantly. Again, from our primary partner in life to our coworkers, our children, if we have them, the cashier at the grocery store. This process is constantly happening, whether we notice it or not. Co-regulation is often talked about primarily, and I think it really came out of parenting literature and research, understanding child development, and it's also been really engaged in the education field, especially primary education, the younger children. But the concept is much broader than only, quote, child development. Again, I really believe it's true with the cashier at the register at the grocery store and anybody else. I'm just picking that particular relationship because it's a brief interaction. That from those brief interactions that we may not even see the person again, to the most critical relationships of our life, this recursive cycle that happens over and over and over again. And a phrase that probably all of you have heard is settled bodies settle bodies. And of course, the reverse of that is true. Unsettled bodies unsettle bodies. And that means literally our nervous system. So being able to approach someone who is in distress from a settled, grounded, relaxed, but that word often gets misused, of course, way, if I have truly settled my own nervous system, then that can go a long way. It might not be a magic bullet at all, but it can go a long way, and it can at least not make it worse. It can go a long way towards helping, and it can at least not make it worse for the other person, as well as to not make it as contagious. If I'm going to look to help somebody who's in a particular state of distress, and I don't have myself settled, and I don't keep myself settled while I'm interacting, I'm real likely to catch it. And now I'm woo, and now we're both just woo. And sometimes that's useful because we got to go fight a bear. But thankfully, I don't really live with a lot of bears or tigers. I will say that, just like Nadine Burke Harris talks about, I grew up with some bears and lived in the cave with some bears, and maybe a lot of you did too. But thankfully today, I don't live with any bears or tigers. I don't. Thank God. I'm so grateful that I don't have to think about my immediate safety. It's a privilege I have, and I'm so grateful for it, that I don't have to think about my immediate safety hardly ever. I hope that's true of y'all, and if it's not, I hope you get what you need in order to have more safety, because if we're not safe, we need to be activated and dealing with it, with that fight, flight, or freeze, fight or flight especially. We need that. It's dangerous to not have that, the use of that when we need it. But thankfully, most of our lives, for most of us, that's not where we live all the time. We have food, we can go to sleep without thinking somebody's going to stab us in our sleep, or a tiger's going to eat us, or whatever. And so we have the possibility of more actively and intentionally thinking about this process. Doesn't mean we're going to do it well all the time. I sure don't. And sometimes I don't even think about it. But we have the possibility more, because when we have safety, it's just more reachable. I included this slide also, which is obviously directly from parenting research and literature, that focuses on how co-regulation actually creates the structure for self-regulation in children's brains, infants and children through the developmental years, that literally it causes the wiring to happen in the brains. And we know so much more about that than we used to know. And I'm so excited about what we're learning and how we're being able to figure out how to implement that knowledge, use that knowledge in education and parenting and many other areas of our lives. And I hope we sure keep that up. And that continues. When I first started in this field, we really believed that 18 and done. Well, I was taught that in school, like in undergraduate, that you kind of are cooked at that time. Like it's a finished product, pull it out of the oven. It is what it is. And so you kind of focus on, how do I cope, and what kind of resources do I need? And that's kind of what we had to offer, or so we thought. And we now know that's not true. We really do have neuroplasticity, our wonderful science word there, that is so wonderful to know, that as long as we're breathing and having brain functioning, there's possibility of change in this structure. It's a lot harder. It takes a lot more repetition as a 50-something than as a 10-year-old. Which is both good and bad, because when terrible things happen to a 10-year-old, it's wired pretty quickly and pretty fiercely. When something terrible happens to a 50-year-old, or 50-something, 50, how old am I, 53, it still will have an impact, of course, on my brain functioning and physical functioning, etc. But it won't be as immediately wired if it's new. Now, it might connect to old stuff, of course, and reinforce the ruts in the road, like the old dirt roads that we drive on sometimes, that it digs that in deeper when a new experience really connects to some of those old experiences. Yet we're constantly having experiences and doing behaviors that change the structure, literally the structure of our brain. And the exciting thing is that we can do that with more intention as long as we have safety. Some of you may know Virginia Satir, who's one of the grandmothers of my field and psychotherapy in general. I just love this quote and wanted to include it of, I believe the greatest gift I can conceive of having from anyone is to be seen by them, heard by them, to be understood by them, and to be touched by them. I have been unable to find a quote that I found many years ago that I speak of often to, again, give this attribution, and I also butcher it, but it sounds like it contradicts this one, but I don't think it does, that our greatest fear is to be known and seen and understood. It's the greatest gift we receive, and often our greatest hope, but it's also really our greatest fear. It scares the heck out of us. There's sort of nowhere to hide when we really are seen and heard. But it's our greatest gift because, again, it helps our bodies to settle. It helps us to have wellness. It helps us to have resources and so many other things in so many other ways. Highlighting the idea of empathy, and probably most of you, if not everybody, know Brene Brown. And I just love her work. And this quote of empathy is communicating that incredibly healing message of you're not alone. And as I was speaking about before with the example of the child falling down and getting hurt, that matters. If a child falls down and the mama is not there, the daddy's not there, the grown-up's not there, they tend to be more panicked and need to know where they are or scream super, super, super loud so somebody's going to come. That we just need to know it. And that's really wired into us. That's not some kind of weakness or, whatever that sometimes we might say to ourselves. That's strength, that ability to know I'm not alone, like Mr. Rogers said, where are the helpers, as well as to provide it. That as we provide empathy actively for other people, that settles our own nervous system as well as offers that gift to other people. So thinking about what all of that has to do, again, thinking a bit more about what all that has to do with co-regulation, really making sure that we know that that's natural. It's part of our nervous system. We don't even have to control it, and it's happening. We can do it. We can control it intentionally to boost it, but it also happens whether we're thinking about it or not. And that's a great thing to notice and to honor in ourselves and to other people, of when somebody might be looking for that, kind of make a bid for that. Attachment theory talks about bids for attention. Sometimes people make a bid for attention that's different than the way I make a bid for attention. So I might not like it and I might not respond to it. But as we can understand more of, that's really how we know we can have safety and we can have the resources and connection to build and boost our resilience, that can open up some space for that to be navigated, even if it's not my style. That's not my style for how to do that, but maybe we can open that up. And that matters, of course, especially with our primary relationships. And in today's incredibly divided culture where we're living, I'm also saying my prayers and hopes that we figure out more of that in a broader sense across our nation and world. We need a lot more of it. Of course, easier said than done. So co-regulation really can be this way to signal safety, thinking about that in a biological sense, literally in our body. It tells our body to start the relaxation process. When we actively engage in, whether we're doing it on purpose or not, when we actively engage in social engagement and co-regulation, then it signals this relaxation response. And again, we can do it on purpose. I'm going to actively make sure, because I need it to do more co-regulation and more social engagement. Those three phrases are kind of interchangeable. The social engagement, co-regulation, and relational care, they're sort of a little bit of a different angle, of course, on the topic, but they're really talking about the same thing. we can actively engage those and boost our resilience, boost our wellness, and boost that of the people around us, at least give them the opportunity for that, as well as be glad that a lot of it happens kind of like breathing. I don't have to think about breathing. It's wired into me. I'm going to do it. And some of the things that, we sure do all the time about simple things like smiling, soft eye contact, nodding, and soft vocal tone that we often instinctually do as long as we're settled. If we're not settled in our own body when we encounter somebody else's distress, we probably do the opposite of each of these. Or certainly if we're out literally in the face of danger, then we might do it as some of these things as a way to try to disarm, which can be a useful thing. But my point is that we often really do smile, soft eye contact when we pick up on that the other person needs some support. I want to support you, whether we're consciously thinking it or we just feel it. And so we do some of these activities with our actions with our body, including even with the cashier at the grocery store, which might be because I pick up on something, but it also might, for me, I often sort of go around in my life doing these things most of the time, even before I actually encounter somebody, to sort of have a feel of what's going on in their nervous system, because it fits my values, but also because, I think it really was wired into me. I did grow up with adversity. I have an ACE score of 7, and it's something I learned to do to try to neutralize threat and to assess threat. If you can respond to my smile with a smile, then maybe we're okay, and I don't need to do anything else. So I know that for me personally, and I'm sure there are others of you here that for which that's true, that's a thing I learned to do to gauge my safety and try to disarm if there's something around that might be maybe problematic. Of course, also relaxed body posture, active, reflective listening, and empathy, and I'm sure would add presence and connection to that. A bit more of thinking about really specifically how we intentionally and actively do this for ourselves and for one another really also helps. It's important for us to think about our own stress response system as well as trauma triggers if we have them. And if we know that about somebody else, and I really like the way the school system now is talking about assume somebody's got a trauma trigger, whether you know it or not. They might. And so it's okay if you find out, no, there's no trauma trigger involved. Fantastic. You move forward with ease, but they might, and you might not know it, and they might not want to tell you, and that's not necessarily your business, but you sure can have that grace that you're ready to extend, and that idea of, well, let me settle. That's going to help regardless of whether there's a trauma trigger or not. And it's going to help even more if there is on your part and or on the part of somebody with whom you're interacting. The idea of compassionate attention and really cultivating that in our relationships and in ourselves, it's a form of mindfulness that we engage in our relationships and our interactions with one another. If I intentionally, purposefully think about compassion as I pay attention and consciously draw my attention and focus and problem solving and whatever else I might engage, then that's almost certainly going to help. And so I would point you towards this resource here, the book Try Softer, where I got that particular quote. We even do it in things like this. And I found myself, since I can only see 3 people right now. So I have to settle myself because I don't know if y'all are not liking what I'm saying or if you're loving what I'm saying or whatever. So I have to be practicing that self-care as well as the 3 faces I can see. And every time they nod or smile, I'm like, yeah, my nervous system settles a little bit more. So, and there's another face, thank you. And a smile, a bit of recognition that we we do this in these days of all these little boxes. Some, for various reasons, we sure do have a lot of the time where, quite reasonably so, we don't see the people in the boxes. It just is part of what we're doing these days. But when we can, we kind of do that scanning, like, what do you think about what I'm saying? What do you think about what I'm saying? To know we're on the right track, but also literally to let our nervous system be able to be more settled. So we can do these things on purpose and notice that we do them on accident. I mean, I don't know, probably a lot of you are like me and you're pet lovers. Maybe not everybody. I sure do know some folks that aren't pet lovers, and that's okay too. But just even being able to think about, like, I just started doing that, like thinking about my dog or my cat. They're not here with me. They are, my cat, I'm sorry, my dog is sometimes, but he's not right now. But I can even think about it. I can even visualize that and use that to help settle my nervous system. So that's a combination with the both and. That's both me doing self-care and me accessing relational care. I can actively think about that relationship and settle myself, which is, I just think that's beautiful. And of course, thinking about friendships, my husband, my children, relationships that matter to us, even a pet. And I really put that in there because, by all means, some people don't have somebody that they really can trust right now in their lives. And that's a sad truth. And maybe most of us have had at least a period in our life that was hard to find. So knowing that, okay, humans are fantastic, and pets, and even other, like, it might sound a little silly, but I have relationship with trees in quite great seriousness. If you could see we could see one, like I have a tree woman right there. I've got trees all over the place, and I try my best to spend as much time with the real things as I possibly can, and we're friends. And I mean that a little bit silly, but I really don't. So I can think about that relationship also, of what is it that brings to me that I can actively engage.
So Mary, I just wanted to let you know you got lots of smiles and nods and thumbs up just a minute ago that you may have missed.
Good, good, good. I appreciate that. And I know we're really, really close to being closing in on our time to finish up. I would love to see questions for me, but also conversation, any comments, because I know there's a wealth of experience and perspectives in this room. So I will stop share. I can go back to it if there aren't. I'm going to try to stop sharing, but I can go back to it if there's not really much. But I would love to hear comments, questions, conversation about this topic.
So far, we don't have a whole lot going on in chat, but this might be a great time if anybody has anything that they would like to share.
I'm going to go back to my screen, but do jump in if you just were not quite to your. Some people might be moving. I do that sometimes when I'm listening to trainings or whatever. I'm actually moving around in the room, but I'm listening. So if there's somebody that's making your way to it, then come on, make your way to it. Uh-oh, I went back. No, I didn't. Okay. So thinking just a little bit more about the ideas. I alluded to this a little bit before when I referenced the quote that I can't find again to attribute of it. It can be really scary. It can be a very fearful thing to let ourselves be seen and or to show up for other people. Again, one side of that or the other might be more difficult. Usually seems to be one side or the other of that equation is more difficult for folks. So it takes courage. And again, from Brene Brown, that really starts with sort of simply showing up and letting it happen, letting ourselves be seen and letting ourselves see somebody else. That already is engaging this whole process that I'm talking about with the both and part of it, the self-care and the relational care. And I think it's important to honor that sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's scary as all dickens. And that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with us, that we're afraid of it. There are lots of reasons, possibly from personal history, but again, from literal wiring in our body and chemistry and biology in our body about why that's a scary thing. It's a risk. It is absolutely a risk. And it can have enormous benefit and payoff for us, for our wellness, again, in all of those areas. Body wellness. Yep, Kristen?
We've had a couple of questions come up, and I know you wanted to get them when they came in.
Fantastic.
So one of them was asking about what resources you suggest to help our clients learn how to co-regulate. And then there was a discussion question about, I'm also thinking about how communities can model this together to invite co-regulation in larger communities by modeling resiliency, anti-racism work. Yeah, so those were kind of the two questions. There's a couple other comments. But...
Okay. The second one, boy, there was a lot packed into that. So I'm probably going to ask you to repeat that in just a moment. And the first one was resources about learning how to co-regulate. That was the question?
Yes. So it was, what resources do you suggest to help our clients learn how to co-regulate?
Okay. So my process, and I'm sorry, I'm going to think out loud for just a moment. My process of figuring out providing resources to people, often I'm so process focused, and I just use that word like 20 times in a sentence, but I'm so process focused versus content focused, which is both good and bad. It's both a strength and definitely I'll just own it as a place where I could do better. That meaning that I will tend to try to kind of get the language and the approach, philosophy, that kind of thing that somebody's coming from as I start thinking about resources. But co-regulation, most of the literature that I know about that and the resources, the materials really is in the parenting resources of looking at things like the Love and Logic program for parents or for educators that talks about getting yourself really ready to enter. One of the things, I'll just kind of highlight this, one of the things that Love and Logic talks about is when it's a recurrent problem that comes up, a recurrent interaction, get ready. I mean, that's the bad thing about it is that the repetition wears you out. The good thing about it is you can plan and you can plan and prepare. So plan, literally, you can come up with when that's said again or when the kid does that again, literally, what will I do and say? That's the prepare. I mean, the plan, but the prepare, when I use the words right now anyway, I'm talking about like get my nervous system settled. Here I go. I'm getting ready to go deal with this. Let me be in the most settled space I possibly can. And so that sort of literature about to access to how do I plan for what I need, where I need to co-regulate, I definitely point to that, because when I feel prepared, it's easier to settle myself and then be a positive part of that cycle. If the more prepared I am, to an extent probably, but the more able I am to do that. And the other sort of side of that about the prepare piece of, I mean, WCCI has some good stuff on the website, and the PACES connection since they changed their name, and Brene Brown and other kinds of literature that we might look to for, well, how do I get myself settled? How do I be thinking about it in intentional ways and literally have these skills? So I would kind of point back to the stuff I was talking about of having a good plan for how do I actively settle myself. Those and whoever asked that question, if you want to send me an email and somebody asked for my email again, my website address is McKinney MFT, my last name and then the letters MFT for marriage and family therapist.com, and my email address is on there, but it's not, my email address is MMFT, McKinney Marriage and Family Therapy in Boone. So MMFTINBOONE @gmail.com. So if you want something more specific about that, I'll be happy to look to provide that to you. And the other question, if you'll help me out again, Kristen?
Absolutely. So let's unpack that one a little bit.
It's a big one.
It is. I am also thinking about how communities can model this together to invite co-regulation in larger communities by modeling resiliency, anti-racism work, etc. And if the person who has asked that question, Jessica, if you would like to clarify in any way, you're welcome to unmute to do so.
Hey, Mary, it's Jessica Stokes. I
Hey,
just was
Jessica.
thinking, hey, Mary, thank you for this. This is wonderful. I'm just thinking about, you know, how I work with faith communities, and I'm just thinking about regulation, self-regulation, co-regulation. I'm just applying your thoughts to faith communities
Yeah.
like mine. And that it wasn't so much a question. I was just letting you know where I was hearing this work in my own work. So thanks again, Mary.
Yeah, thank you. And that helps to actually formulate a little bit more of a thought, because the first thing that popped into my head with that question was that's exactly what WCCI is doing. And hopefully we'll keep getting better at it and have more and more and more partners with it. I just can't even begin to put words to how excited I am to be a part of this initiative. And it's already had wonderful impact on our community, on our schools and otherwise, I think. And so things like that, and definitely, Jessica, like you're talking about, in the faith community, like my church, we have the WISE designation, which is to be welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged for people of all mental health differences, from mental illness to sort of normal, quote, ups and downs in our mental health. That active programs like that, and we have Black and Boone that are looking, one of the things locally to look to address some of the racism issues, and I know they're very actively working on how do we cooperate with one another about that, including inviting cooperation from white folks not of color, to be a part of that. So those active initiatives certainly are some of the broad ways that then hopefully also trickle down into daily functioning as we keep practicing it in these broad initiatives and programs through our churches, through our schools, through our businesses, having trauma-informed businesses and anti-racist businesses, and all of the other things that she put into that question or in that thought. And so we each one, of course, can look to actively engage ourselves in those things that are happening, and or to do what Denise and et al. Did in starting this whole thing with the WCCI. Like, boy, we need that. Let's do that. So where we see I mean, we can't all be necessarily Superwoman every day or Superman every day. That's okay. We can show up and be a part of what's already happening. And where we see those gaps, those holes, we can look to be ourselves to bring something new into the mix, and or to support the people who might. Those are my thoughts about that. Other comments or questions at all?
Just a lot of people saying thank you for the information and appreciating the reminders that you have been able to share with them.
Yeah, I have. So thank you for sharing that with me. And I have, before we got started, before folks came out of the waiting room, Sarah and Kristen and I were talking a little bit about doing this for ourselves. And I made the comment of, I honestly do not know what kind of shape I would be in if I didn't do the work I do, because I'm forced to have these conversations over and over again. And that causes me to go, Eventually it started. I can admit that it didn't necessarily start right away when I started my career. At some point I started doing a little bit of, I think that might mean me. And being a parent, saying it to my kids. And then I go, yeah, that might be something I need to do too. That as I practice saying it, and I've got on my desk a quote from Richard Bach that reads, we best teach what we need to learn. I might have messed it up a little bit, but that's the gist of it. I find I do these things, I teach these things because I so need to learn it and remember it and practice it. And it affords me that opportunity for the reinforcement of the wiring in my brain for these resilient skills and relationships. So I'm glad y'all got something out of it too.
So it looks like we're pretty much at the end. And I want to say a huge thank you to Mary for all of this information. And thank you to everybody who was here and participated. And hopefully you all have a session coming up soon at 3:30 And this recording will be available after the session. So if you missed parts of it or you want to go, I know I'm going to go back and revisit a lot of it because I was distracted doing other things. So
Hard to multitask.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you so much, Mary, for sharing the wisdom that you shared.
Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. And thank you so much, Kristen and Sarah. Y'all made that much less painful.
Yeah, you did great, Mary. That was
Yeah,
wonderful.
That was wonderful. And I'm just taking notes like crazy. I can't wait
Yeah.
to implement some of this stuff in the classroom too. So
Oh, good.
Appreciate
Thank you. I appreciate that.
we'll have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye.